everyone. Good evening and welcome, and thank you very much for being with us this evening. The sharp, eagle-eyed amongst you will realise that I am not Pete Hoskin, who was meant to be editing this evening's ThinkIn. He is the sort of original owner, instigator, genius behind this concept of slow reviews that we do at Tortoise. But he has, in a very strongly the dog ate my homework kind of style, run up the stairs of his house without looking where he's going, directly into a door, and knocked himself out cold and now has concussion. So he's not able to be with us this evening. So I'm kind of standing in at the last minute for him. So sad for Pete, and we hope you get better soon, but quite nice for me because it means I get to do the cool Primadonnas ThinkIn. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the presence of greatness this evening. I'm very, very excited to have the people with us who are with us, and to be doing what we're doing, which is the first time we've tried it. We've gathered together four really talented, interesting women and asked them to pick. We kind of call them a cultural artifact, which sounds rather odd and a bit dead and dry, but just a thing, a book, a film, a play, an artist, can be anything, that changed not only their lives, but sort of there's a good case to say it changed the sort of course of history thereafter as well. And just to talk about it, to talk about what it means to them, how it influences their own thinking, their own work, and how they think it's important for the rest of us. As always, we'd love to hear from you as well. So as I talk to Christy and Catherine and Shola and Melody, please do join in. I'd love to know what you think of the things that they're going to be talking about. And I'd like to know as well your nominations for things that you think warrant a slow review. And maybe if Pete agrees with you, we can run it in Tortoise on a future date. So if I can, I might start first with Catherine, if I can. Catherine Mayer, best-selling author, you're a journalist, an activist, co-founder and president, no less, of the Women's Equality Party, and also the co-founder of the Primadonna Festival. And really the Primadonna Festival is why we're here. Would you mind just telling us, Catherine, a bit about what it is, the Primadonna Festival, and why it needs to exist?
Happy to do that. Primadonna, there's a bit of a clue in the name. It's not women only, but it's putting women first. And it came about because in 2018, I was visiting an old friend of mine, Jane Dyball, who thought that she was about to retire. She'd had very unusual. She'd had these big jobs in the music industry. And I say unusual because there's hardly any women in the music industry. She often was sitting on boards. I remember her coming back from a board meeting where there had been 18 men and her.
Nice.
Yeah. But anyway, she felt she needed a bit of a rest. And I was staying at her place in Suffolk. And she mentioned that they'd been doing kind of small scale festivals at their place. And she wondered whether there was room for a book festival. And I pretty much, you know, that phrase, you bite somebody's hand off. I think I actually emerged with blood dripping down my face at that point. Because the thing is, I've been an author. I was a journalist for a long time, but I've also been an author for a long time. And one of the things I noticed when I had a book out is I'm one of those lucky authors who has sort of broken through to the point where I get invited to festivals. But there were so few women, and most of the women that there were would be the same women from one festival to the next, and most of us would be white and middle class. And the audiences were the same as well. That was one of the really depressing things, was that you were seeing, they were great people, but you were seeing the same people over and over again. So I said to Jane, there's absolutely room, and I know what it should be. And then I started, I went straight to Kit Duvall, the novelist, because she had just done, she'd created that platform called Common People. So she was also focusing on writers from working class backgrounds, which is one of the big gaps. But Shola and various other people got hooked in very quickly, and there were 17 of us in the end who co-founded the festival. And we set out right from the beginning to create something that was going to be properly inclusive and really interesting and joyful. And as I say, I mean, women and all genders, and it was the point of it. The point of it was to do the best possible festival that we could. And one of the things about the kind of unintentionally or intentionally exclusionary cultures is that they exclude so many people that you actually want to see. And we did our first real life festival in 2019, of course, not realizing that was going to be our last chance for a while to gather in person. I have a favorite clip from that festival, which is Shola leading us in dancing. There was a guy called Sign Kid, who's an amazing deaf rap artist who was doing this brilliant set on stage, and we were all in the backstage area, and it was Shola and it was Elif Shafak and it was I'm trying to think who else was there, Louise Doughty, Winnie Lee, and Shola just got us all up and dancing, though none of us can dance as well as Shola. And that was that sort of spirit of Primadonna. It's just like ridiculously good fun, and it changes. The other point is it changes lives. So people have got book deals. A lot of aspiring writers come, a lot of agents come, a lot of publishers come. There's a whole comedy strand. So we've had all these first-time book deals out of Primadonna. We've had somebody who came who won this sort of fake competition that we do where the prizes are curly-whirly, but they get to perform comedy for Radio 4's commissioning editor for comedy, who's one of the Primadonnas. She's now got a gig writing for Radio 4 comedy program. So that was the idea, was open up, have fun, do all this family stuff, make it brilliant, but also change lives. And our slogan is "the world as it should be" for one weekend. So we're also modeling our idea of heaven, really.
I mean, it does sound like quite the most heavenly way to spend a weekend. My colleague James, who's in the chat, will put in the link so you can buy your tickets, because it is happening in not very long away, last weekend of July, I think, IRL. It's literally, you can buy a ticket and go there and be with humans.
That's right. It's in real life. We've got a new home at the Museum of East Anglian Life, which is this ridiculous kind of stately home that has beautiful rolling grounds, and you can camp there if you want. And by the way, we are just doing something. We're very aware that so many people have suffered in the pandemic in so many ways, but economically. And so what we're doing is we are just launching pay what you can tickets, which means that you can go for as little as £1 if you want to. Hopefully some people who can pay more will pay more, but we really wanted to make accessible, there's no point in us putting on all these fabulous things, and they are really fabulous things, if we can't also make it accessible. So that's what we're doing.
What a brilliant thing to do, and to make it accessible. It'll also be much better fun, I'm sure, if there's just a whole bunch of people who are super enthusiastic about the content all rubbing up along together. And thanks, James has put the link in the chat. So we're going to get into slow reviews now. And I haven't thought about a plan of who would go first, actually, but maybe let's start with Melody. Hi, Melody. Let's see if we can unmute you. Now, first of all, I should say congratulations to Melody, because it is your publication day for your own debut novel today.
Oh, thank you. It's been
How
very
exciting. And thank you for spending an hour out of your precious day to come and talk to us. But rather sort of oddly and sort of in a slightly bittersweet fashion, we'll talk a bit about Moth perhaps, we're kind of asking you to do this slow review where we've said to you, okay, pick something that you think is really pivotal, can be anything, and then tell us a little bit about why. So tell us, what have you picked?
I've picked an Indian artist called Amrita Gill. She's not very well known in the Western world, and I stumbled into some of her work at a gallery in Ahmedabad in India 3 years ago when I was researching Moth. And I was just blown away by the quality of her work and just how good it was. And then also quite disappointed that as an art lover, I hadn't seen any of her work before. So I started reading about her and reading about her history and her background. She was painting in like the 1930s, just before partition.
Okay.
And she came from a Hungarian mother and an Indian father. She grew up in Europe and studied fine arts in Paris. But then in her early 20s, she really wanted to come back to India and sort of experiment with her roots and different styles of painting. And she became really focused on trying to paint Indian women in villages, poorer Indian women. And she did these set of paintings. One in particular that always stays with me is called Three Girls. And it just shows these three Indian women with their shawls on and their scarf, beautiful, rich colours. But the girls look really pensive and slightly stoic. And it's just a real measure of how the painting itself and the techniques were so beautiful, but the story behind it, of why the girls look quite melancholy, is the fact that they're all, they're born into poverty. They're probably getting beaten by their families. They, getting married to men that they don't know. So their lives are very controlled and there's no way out. So that you can feel that just in that gaze, how trapped they are in their lives. And there's a real tension in her work where she paints so beautifully and uses such rich colors, but then the subject matters are really poignant. So you really feel this tension, which is very much what she was feeling and trying to explore. And she herself died at the age of 28, and she had an abortion that didn't work. And I just found it very fascinating reading about her. And then her work is just really quite extraordinary.
And you were researching moth when you came across her. Was it the first time, or you sort of encountered her by accident almost?
It was by accident, and I was just researching moth, and I found this art gallery in Ahmedabad. So I decided I would spend an afternoon there, and they had an entire exhibition of her work. She did a lot of self-portraits. She's also known as the Frida Kahlo of India. And I really, because one of the things that I'd explore in moth is the silence that women have during times of political unrest, and how when you hear historical stories, you never really know what the situation was like for women, because very often in those times women were silenced and not able to talk about their experiences. And I very much felt that her work also captured that silence, where there's layers of meaning and you can't quite figure out what's going on behind the closed doors.
So when you said you're an art lover, and there are lots of artists, I'm guessing, that whose work inspires you or makes you think, and you've mentioned contrast and layering and things. Tell us how you sort of put that all into your process in producing Moth, and a little bit about the novel as well, because you're sort of this lauded debut novelist and it's coming out today, so none of us have read it yet. I'd love to know how all of this kind of goes together.
Sure. So Moth is the story of a Brahmin family. It's set during the 1940s, India's independence and subsequent partition. It's set in Delhi. The story explores the impact of the disproportionate violence on the lives of women who are caught up in times of political unrest. It looks at trauma and how women deal with trauma through the domestic sphere, through their relationships with each other, through fairy tales, through myth, and just kind of explores these things. And I really wanted to try and pinpoint the more intimate stories of individual women's lives and set it against a very strong, weighty political background, and then have the tension between the historical and the intimate and see how those work together. And the time that I spent in India, and I did go to a few art galleries, and I just find looking at art, because it's visually so thought-provoking, and I always seem to have a very visceral reaction, like I feel it all over myself, in my body, in my stomach, in my throat, when I look at certain pieces of art. and they then cause me to think more deeply about the topics that I want to write about. And they just they cause me to ask a lot more questions. And I think the more questions you ask as a woman, as an artist, the more topics you uncover, the more you're able to just delve more into the human condition.
Melody, what do you hope the response, I don't mean the response sort of critically, I mean the response of a reader is going to be when they read Moth? What do you
I really hope that they read it and they pick up on the political and the historical background, and then they themselves are then driven to do a bit more research into that part of history, because I think that we're all too ignorant of the past, and the more we're aware of it, the more we can have compassion, the more we can instigate changes, the more empathetic we can be. But I also really hope that they attach to the characters. I've got very different types of women in the novel, and I've tried to have different characters so that you have all types of women from all types of societies and life and positions in life and ages, so that you have all their voices, and in a way you have a universal female voice through these many characters. And if the reader is moved by it, and yeah, I would really like the reader to be emotionally affected by it.
Have you already started your next one?
I have. I'm on the third edits now of my next one. So hopefully, it should be done by the end of the summer. Yeah.
Gosh, Melody. Well, huge congratulations on publishing. It must have been just so exciting. You've been in bookshops today, looking at it.
Yeah. I did do a bit of stroking, I have to admit. Very nice cover.
The lovely smell of a new book. It's lovely. I'm absolutely thrilled for you. And you're one of the speakers at the Primadonna Festival at the end of July as well. So if people want to hear more about your extraordinary story, by then they can have read the book as well. So they can ask better questions than I can. Thank you so much for being here. And Amrita Gill is welcomed into the canon of slow reviews, and perhaps with yourself or with one of us at Tortoise, we can kind of put together a piece that sort of celebrates her work a little bit more, because I think it's not well known in the sort of wider world. I'm going to come next, if I can, to Dr. Shola. Dr. Shola Moshong Bamimu, thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to see you. I'm sorry your hay fever is so miserable. Now, Shola, you're somebody who is a wearer of many hats. You do many things. I mean, maybe you're a literal wearer of many hats, but you're a figurative wearer of many hats as well. And I had no idea that you've been part of the inception of the Primadonnas Festival. But tell us a little bit about what you've picked for your slow review choice and how it sort of feeds into all of your work.
Oh, that's excellent. So first of all, about Primadonna, everything Catherine said is that and more. There's just, I think the best way to describe it to those who are listening is you have to be there. You know, I know we're amongst writers, but sometimes there are words that can't describe the vibe, and that sense of belonging without having to try hard. And that's the best way I can describe, definitely the in-person Primadonna. And the virtual one we had last year was a total, absolute kick-ass event. It was wonderful. It was really wonderful. So I really encourage everyone to come. It's a lot of fun. And when Catherine talked about me dancing, that's because I was just being me. That's the kind of place Primadonna is. You're just you, and everybody loves you just as you are. All right. So my choice is the writer Chinua Achebe. Yeah. He's an African writer, and his book, particularly Things Fall Apart, is one of those rare gems, I have to say, of African writing that literally opened up the floodgates for many other African writers. Growing up, you know, I read African style writing. I read Shakespeare. I read everything you can possibly think of. You know, I had the wishing chairs and the faraway trees with everything else. So I had a whole balance because certain things just triggered my passion and my interest. And I used to write little stories, you see, growing up. There's something about Chinua Achebe's book, Things Fall Apart, that really spoke to me even as a child. So I'm talking about way back in secondary school, which was a long time ago. I know I don't look it. You know, some of us have such, the ethos is there. We just look young, even when we're 100. But the point is, there was something about his writing, bearing in mind that his book wasn't published until the late 50s or early 60s, if I recall. And it was the way he depicted the authenticity of the African identity. Remember that back then, and even now, there's still, you still get a lot of distortion about the characteristics and the character of an African person, right? They're all the stereotypes are usually just put in without any thinking. But there was something so original about his writing that even as a young student, I just felt like I could see me in there. And of course, his books went on to be critically acclaimed, to win lots of awards. He was, globally recognized, which is all well and good. But I think his contribution, his writing contributed to the development of African writing. Now, Chinua Achebe is Nigerian. So I know when I use the word African, I'm very careful. I really want people to stop thinking Africa is is a country when it's a continent. The point is we have a number of African writers from different nations that have contributed to the development of Africa's writing, the literary success of many African writers, and Chinua Achebe is one of them. His book Things Fall Apart follows this main character, Okonkwo. Now, Okonkwo is an Igbo man, a proud Igbo man who resisted the British colonialism, right? And the imposition of colonial rule, brilliantly, shall I say. But it is the way Chinua Achebe captured the complexities and nuances of trying to, the impositions, how that conflicted with cultural laws and cultural norms, and how, basically you had someone like Okonkwo who did not want to conform, because as far as it was concerned, his religion, his way of life was perfect. Who are these people to come tell us what to do? While in the same space, because this is reflective of real society, are those Nigerians who would just look for this, peace of mind. This is the state of things. Let's just go with the flow. And so the reality and the toxicity of still trying to hold on to what is true, the roots of who they are from their towns and their cultures and who they are, right? That it was that fight. I recognize that still today. I probably did not have the words to describe it way back then when I was younger. I definitely have the words now because I'm way older, right? But there's something, and there was something about it for me that really just captured my imagination. It captured my heart. And even though in the story, it ultimately leads to his death, there's something even proud in the way that ended, because it was on his own terms. I'm not talking about suicide. That's not what I'm talking about, people. I'm just saying the way he came in and he went out on his own terms. But I would say it's such a strong book in the way it introduces the authenticity and truthness of African characters.
So,
oh,
sorry, I don't know, I was muted weirdly. I can see a couple of people in the chat joining with your love of Things Fall Apart. I love this vision of there's a sort of cocktail. There's the little Shola, young Shola reading Chinua Achebe and the Magic Faraway Tree, and somewhere in the outcome of that cocktail of books, we end up with This Is Why I Resist. I'm interested to know how those things all weave together and end up with you.
That's true. But you see, there's an African saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And maybe other writers feel this way, but aside from maybe my dad, my mom, and my family, I'm sure I had some really close friends, but reading was the very next best thing for me. I mean, look, if my parents wanted to shut me up, all they had to do was get me a new book. That was it. And my dad used to take me book shopping every other weekend. So clearly he knew the way to handle this child, not pacifier, just give her a book to read. And I used to take a lot of joy even when I read a book, and I would not sleep until I finished reading it. So whether it was the Enid Blytons or the other African writers, there's this series called Pace Setters. So I don't know if those watching, some of them may know about the series. It's like published by Macmillan's, but it had so many different Nigerian authors writing different kind of novels, right? And I used to literally just like I was drinking it up. My mom would get me once and swallow it up right there and then, and I would not sleep. Even though I had school the next day, I would still be reading till 2 a.m. because I just had to finish that story. For me, I feel very strongly that your imagination is tied in with what makes you passionate. I think a lot of things that we read reflects a lot of things that it reflects part of who we are. And for many writers, I think that, and this is what I suspect of some writers, so please, those writers online, you please do tell me if I'm wrong. I kind of feel that when I read books from some of my favorite writers and new authors, I kind of think that I'm seeing a different side of them, the side of them the world doesn't get to see. Like, that alternative Catherine, the alternative Melody, the alternative Christy, living in a different universe, that this is how they would do it. That's kind of, I think you're getting a glimpse into something else. And it's the way writers also weave words like lyrics. You know what I mean? It's the way, it's almost like it's a rap on a different melody. That's why I read things from, I love books with what you might call in the fighter jet planes. I love them. I love books with the Vikings and the fight. I know. But I'm like, ooh, that's a really good part, right? You should see me when I started reading Harry Potter. You should have seen me when I started reading Harry Potter.
Loving it.
Oh, no, you have no idea. The way I got into the Harry Potter, this world, because I was getting ready for work, as you do, and I had the TV on this breakfast channel, as you do. And I heard people complaining about a book that just wasn't right for children. It's just not right. And it has all this blah, blah, blah. And this is me just nodding my head, not really listening. And then I heard words like, oh, pixies and goblins. I was like, whoa, hold up a second. I grew up on pixies and goblins. In fact, I love them, Moonface and Silky and all of them. So I was like, what's wrong with this book? So I decided to go get the book. And if it was okay, I was going to send it to my brother. I read the book. I didn't hear about Harry Potter until the 4th book came out, Liz. So I bought the first book to read and send to my little brother. I ended up buying all 4 books, a set for myself and a set for him. And then each time a Harry Potter book came, I went back to read everything. Let me tell you, that's the only book I've ever read twice, 3 times, 4 times. I will get on the bus or on the train and I'm seeing people read, Harry Potter book and a particular section. I'm like, oh my God, that part is so good. I mean, this is just how you get with books. How can you not see somebody reading something you really like and you're like, can we talk about it? Can we talk about it? And I'm just one of those really embarrassing people. I just do that, which is why my kids don't like going to the...
I can see people with big cheesy grins laughing as you tell your story about how much you love Harry Potter. There's no judgment here, but I've never read it. I've never read any Harry Potter, even to my children. I think I feel like I've missed the boat and I'm embarrassed to get into it now. I can see
you embarrassed. It's never too late. Get on that boat fast, all right? Get on the boat. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, I think, just as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the books that I read growing up, one of the things that I find incredibly, it's one of the things I always thought when I was reading Harry Potter books, like, oh my goodness, it wasn't just about the magic, it was the suspense and the drama and me laughing my head off, right? So it wasn't just 8-year-old Shola reading it. It was 30-year-old Shola reading and going and connecting with 8-year-old Shola and going, oh my God, we found something in common. What's going on, girlfriend? I mean, books bring that out of you. Even books that get you, don't you read some books that get you really angry? I mean, I remember reading this John Grisham book called The Partner. Liz, I finished reading this book, I put it down and I started clapping. I did not stop clapping until people came out and they was going to chill. I was like, hold on, I'm still clapping. Oh my God, what a book, what a book, what a book. This is how I embarrass my kids half the time. And I think books should get you passionate, emotional, laughing, crying, angry. It should get you somewhere, because that's why you're reading the blessed thing in the first place, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I've never myself applauded a book at the end, but I'm going to now, because I definitely have the feeling. Thanks so much. It's lovely to hear from you. And please do, everybody. I want to hear what everybody thinks about Harry Potter. If you've ever applauded a book, I want to hear the book that's made you the most angry. Just pile in and we'll chat to you all as we come along. Let's come to Christy, Christy Lefteri, who is with us. Huge best-selling, super lauded megastar author of The Beekeeper of Aleppo. Hi, Christy. Nice to see you.
Hi. Don't say that. That just made me blush. I was like, and by the way, Shola, I hope I end up sitting next to you on a bus one day, because I would love to. I'm like you as well. I'm like, oh, what are you reading? And I end up having conversations with people. So we'd probably miss our stop if we ended up sitting next to each other.
You know what? If one of our co-founders, Katie Vanek, has a really good test of if someone's going to be like a spirit tortoise to work here, which is, do you talk to people on the tube? And if the answer is yes, then you're in. Because quite often people go, oh no, I would never.
No, I do.
So Christy, your new one, Songbirds, is not out yet. It's coming out a bit later on, 8th of July. But you'll be talking about that at the festival at the end of July.
Yeah, end of July. Yeah, I had a look to see.
Tell us what your slow review pick is. You've gone for something very different.
I know, I've gone for something entirely different. But the reason I chose this, it was a very personal choice for me, and which I'll explain. But I've actually chosen Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. And so it took me ages to decide. I was going backwards and forwards, and then I thought, no, I'm going to stick with this. This is going to be my choice. First of all, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's I did a psychoanalytic training, and I worked with people that had suffered with trauma. And what I learned I was working at the Gordon Hospital in Westminster, and what I learned really, really helped me, not only with my own emotions and my own stuff, you know, because which I'll explain in a minute, but it kind of really helped me as well when I was writing and trying to kind of create characters that had maybe internal motives that they didn't quite know about either. So anyway, I'll tell you the reason I chose Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, because I thought it was such a game changer. It basically, in The Interpretation of Dreams, it's where he introduced his theory of the unconscious. And this theory of the unconscious and Freud's understanding of mental illness actually had such a huge impact on society and helped change the way that society thought about and dealt with mental illness. So before Freud's interpretation of dreams, mental illness was really considered mostly to be an organic disease. So psychiatrists and society as a whole thought that all mental illness was a disease of the brain. So there were huge kind of divides between the way that people saw sane people on one side and insane people on the other side. But what Freud was interested in, which he introduced in The Interpretation of Dreams, was the psychological causes, which were previously completely ignored. And then as a result, psychiatry turned away from purely looking at the organic causes and towards the search for inner conflicts and childhood trauma to understand mental health and mental illness. And so what happened was that line between the sane and the insane became blurred. And then people started to understand that anyone could suffer from mental illness. And the reason I chose it is because this is such a hugely important part of our society right now. But I think sometimes we forget where it came from. And although there are many of Freud's theories that I don't agree with and that I kind of would dispute in a conversation with people, I still think it's wonderful to remember that. And there are many of his theories that I absolutely love, and But I think it's so important to remember that what went before and then what came after, and how that has had such a huge impact on society, on the way we see mental health and mental illness, the fact that it's not so blurred, the fact that it's helped us to understand that we can all suffer from mental illness. And this idea that, you know, it gave us a new way of thinking about and interpreting human behavior and human emotions. And I think in the interpretation of dreams, which is the text I chose in particular, where he introduced the idea of the unconscious, it's this idea that, you know, it's basically the ideas that are forced out of consciousness by a process of repression, which can still assert themselves and influence our lives. And these are the kind of things that I'm so interested in when I'm writing. Like, for example, when I was writing the character of Nuri, who had suffered so much trauma, I started to think really carefully about the people that I'd worked with at the Gordon Hospital and how their traumas manifested in ways where there may have been, for example, something that they couldn't actually remember, like they couldn't actually place it, but it manifested in their lives in a way that kind of resulted in, I don't know, it kind of forced them to make certain decisions that they may have not otherwise made, or forced them into certain relationships that they may have not otherwise been in. And in the case of Nuri, in my novel, he's actually hallucinating because he absolutely cannot grieve. So the grieving process has kind of adapted and manifested into a hallucination because he can't cope with the loss of his son. But anyway, the reason this is so personal to me is because when I started the training, I had to go into therapy myself, and I have really in my life suffered with a lot of mental illness, which I think is kind of linked again to my writing and also to my childhood, because my parents were both refugees. My dad was a commanding officer of the war in Cyprus, and I think he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and I've written articles about transgenerational trauma and how trauma can pass from one generation to the next. So the experience that I've had in therapy, and also the experience that I have had helping others at the time when I was working as a psychodynamic psychotherapist, had such an influence on my life, but also on my writing as well. And I could have chosen someone other than Freud, like Melanie Klein. And so I was actually going to go for Melanie Klein because of the impact that her work had on understanding further these kind of unconscious processes, and also children's play and how that can be kind of viewed symbolically. But I chose Freud in the end because I felt that that's where it really all began. Our way, you know, and then sometimes I think, imagine that these ideas hadn't manifested in society. Where would we have been if we were still kind of looking at mental illness? I mean, I'm sure that wouldn't have happened, and hopefully we would have still ended up where we are now, with understanding mental illness and understanding that anyone can suffer from it. But to look back, you know, before the 1900s, and how if you did suffer from mental illness, how you would have been viewed and categorized and boxed in, just to see how far we've come in just over 100 years, I think is amazing.
Christy, and it's a really good choice. I mean, it definitely ticks the qualifying box of did it change the world? You know, it's one of those ones that it really, really materially did, and you can really feel it hearing you talk about it. And I knew you'd done the psychoanalysis training, but you can feel it in Beekeeper of Aleppo, those sort of layers, sense of why this and how this person reacts and things. As an I've never read any Freud. I mean, as an ordinary punter, you know, is it like a big fat tome like that, or could I read it? Will I understand it?
The interpretation of dreams isn't too thick, but you can just kind of dip into it. Yeah. I don't think it's something that you need to kind of start and go, right, I'm going to read Freud, and then you know, I think you can just dip into it. One of my favorite papers that he's written is Mourning and Melancholia, where he discussed the difference between depression and grieving. And there are things, you know, I think the theories I think if anyone's reading Freud for the first time, just to bear in mind that he's also a product of his time, and the theories have progressed and developed so much since then. But it's just wonderful to kind of see where these all started, where the genesis of it was, where the seeds were planted. So I don't know. I mean, I've said about the interpretation of dreams, but I'd probably start with Mourning and Melancholia. That's my favorite one.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Christy. I might come back to you at the end because I'd love to hear a little bit more about Songbirds, but I'm conscious of time and I want to make sure we've got enough time to chat to Catherine about her picks too. Now, Catherine, you have been working on a number of things. I mean, you've been the world's busiest person, weirdly, through lockdown, enormously productive, but you've obviously made a pick that's incredibly personal to you.
Yes, and I'm kind of glad in a way because Christy came round to using the word grief there, and I didn't want to harsh everyone's mellow, but she sort of has brought things in a nice circuit because I have to explain my choice. I chose the album Entertainment by Gang of Four. It is obviously a slightly, you know, like all good feminists, I've chosen something by my husband to talk about. My husband, Andy Gill. But it has been something that throughout lockdown I have re-engaged with in an incredibly intensive way, because Andy died at the start of the pandemic. And when he died, he had been working on a covers album that was originally conceived as an album to mark the 40th anniversary of this album, Entertainment. And so he'd gone to pretty much try and chart the extraordinary influence of this one album. And, you know, we were talking about game changers tonight. Entertainment, it came out in 1979. Andy and his three other co-founders of the band never became sort of world bestriding colossi, though Andy really had a big career in music, also as a producer of a lot of well-known bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But they had, and in particular Andy, and in particular kicking off with this album, the most extraordinary influence on music. There are very few artifacts, I think was the word you used, in any genre that actually really do change the game. I'd actually like to read you a tiny bit of yet another man's words, not mine. Andy's best friend at school was a guy called Adam Curtis, who's now a very famous filmmaker. And Adam gave the eulogy or one of the eulogies at Andy's memorial. The one bit of luck about when Andy died was that it was just before lockdown, so we could actually celebrate him in a way that's been denied to other people. And Adam described something I think is incredibly important in his eulogy, and it was about he at school watching Andy and the original vocalist John King, who was also at school, develop a sound that was entirely distinct, that was new. And then he describes the way Andy as a guitar player, over and above that, did something else new. And he says, I remember seeing one of the first concerts Gang 4 ever did, and I was amazed, not only because it was so powerful, but because it somehow captured a mood that was emerging at that moment, the mood that we have all around us today, that somehow you could use music to do more than just entertain. And I'm fully aware that there was politics in music in the 60s, but what they did was capture and express something much bigger, how power in the modern world was now working through culture. That culture wasn't just a way to express yourself and your political ideas, that really culture and entertainment were now inextricably linked with power, and Gang of Four got that, and they brought that out to the open. And then he says about Andy did one other thing that went beyond that. He somehow created a noise that was completely and uniquely his noise. People say, oh yes, he borrowed from Wilco Johnson, or oh yes, there was bits from Hendrix. of course, that's true. But I remember watching Andy when he first started, and it was just this wave of noise that was completely and utterly his own. I could go on, but and so this thing I'm holding, and this is the only intentional bit of product placement this evening, is since Andy died. When he died, he was working, as I say, on this covers album. And he had already got people like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Massive Attack and Gary Newman and La Rue, very unexpected people. He'd got them involved with this project, and they'd all covered different songs from that, you know, again, a word that gets abused, but I will say seminal, because it was a seminal album and it influenced so many different bands. But it wasn't finished when he died. It had already moved away from being just about entertainment. I've got the vinyl here. You'll see it's wrapped. I'm not going to unwrap it because this is a limited edition, this particular edition, and you'll see the number 1 here. So that is staying wrapped. But what I can show you with the CD, Damien Hirst, who was one of the many, so the people who were influenced by Gang of Four, it wasn't just musicians, though it was so many musicians. REM was their support act. You know, you right the way through to today, you hear very young musicians who are still being influenced. But Damien, who grew up in Leeds where they started, has done the artwork for the album, and it's a double album, and with this dog thing. So I thought you'd enjoy the kind of eye motif, the dog's eye motif.
Oh, cool.
And there's actual kind of googly eyes going on here. But I mean, I saw, you know, at the beginning you played Naturals Not In It, which the album that I've finished for Andy is called The Problem of Leisure, which is a quote from the song Naturals Not In It, which is on Entertainment, this groundbreaking album. And I saw in the chat that somebody had referred to it as being the music from Marie Antoinette, the Sofia Coppola movie. And of course it is from that movie, but it was written long before that movie. And, you know, this is the thing about game-changing art, is you hear it, you see it, it is taken up directly, but you also, for me, again, a word that gets overused in conjunction with Andy, people talk about angular guitar playing. I very often will be listening to the radio and I'll think, God, that's Andy. And then I'll listen to one more second more. No, it's somebody imitating him. That's the thing about creating your own sound. And the sound that they created was very stripped back, very pared down. Andy's studio is just through there. Charlotte recorded her book there recently, because we do audiobooks in there. And one of the things I used to hear Andy doing is there would be musicians in the studio with him, and I'd hear him kind of like working with these people, telling them to do less, telling them to create more impact with less. And that's also one of the things that's been interesting for me as a writer, and working with so many other writers and other art forms, is so much of this, so much of the aesthetic, so much of the kind of underpinning critical theory, all of it is relevant to everything we do.
Catherine, I wonder how you, I mean, a personal sort of memory of Gang of Four. I grew up in Leeds, a bit later. I grew up in Leeds in the 90s and sort of hung out with unsuitable boys who like Nirvana and the Chili Peppers, and the cooler of the boys liked Gang of Four, and the not so cool ones hadn't realized. So but the sound, I haven't listened to Gang of Four until I was sort of catching up with myself when I knew I was standing in for Pete for this, and the sound is really evocative of that time of my life, sort of under the underpass in Leeds wearing just the world's worst outfit. There was a lot of tie-dye happening at that time for me. The hair was really bad, but it sort of had, there was a sort of joyful, brittle angriness about the vibe in my kind of gang of friends, that I sort of associate with Gang of Four, because like you say, it tells, we're all so naive, you know, a bunch of idiot kids thinking we had the answers to everything. And then there was this music that somehow was sort of saying things that was, you know, much wiser than we knew it was in a way. And I wonder how you, having lived, you know, you and Andy were together for decades, I wonder how you felt, obviously having lost him and then coming to this project that he'd started. I wonder how that sort of felt as a way of being closer to him, or what was the feeling of doing it?
But there's two different things there. I mean, in terms of its extraordinary appropriateness to the moment we live in, one of the things that's very noticeable about Gang of Four is they never were not appropriate. But Andy is the only member of the band who was in it right from the beginning in the 70s until the moment he died. And he continued to write new music and to move on musically. And he was never going to be one of those people, you know, there are bands that do sort of horrible karaoke versions of themselves,
Yeah.
which I've actually witnessed once at a Tory party conference. I saw Tony Hadley do a version of Gold with a boombox there to a tables full of Tories.
Wow.
In many, many respects, that would never, ever have been Andy, but he was always moving forward. But in terms of what I was doing, yes, when you lose somebody, one of the things that you need to do, I think, is to find a way to celebrate them and memorialize them. But I'm also, you know, back to that point about grief. And one of the reasons I ended up writing a book about grief is because people think of grief as something that needs to be expelled. You know, people have internalized ideas about the stages of grief, and they think you have to move from one determined point to the next. And you have to sort of mark them off because it's your route to being grief-free. But that's a really both unrealistic, and it's ignoring kind of one of the obvious things about grief when you are the one who has it, which is that grief is about love. And so for me, it has been an absolute joy, even if it's a bittersweet joy, even if I cry, you know, to be able to engage constantly with Andy's legacy and do what he wanted to do. I'm luckier than so many people because it was obvious for me what needed to be done, and I've been doing it.
I'm so looking forward to getting my hands on a copy, actually, and it looks so satisfying, that lovely exploring of the vinyl and the googly eyes and the tactility of it. It's such a treat. And thank you so much, Catherine, for chatting to us. I might just try and bring in a couple of people from the room who've been chatting along and listening to you. Is Chisha there? Who is, you made a comment that you love the Chinua Achebe as well. Are you there, Chisha? Maybe she's shy. I'd love to hear from her if she's there. No, doesn't look like it. Okay, let's try and hear from Angie Rawlinson, because you also read the Chinua Achebe, and you said it changed and informed all I'd known before. Are you there, Angie? Oh dear, we're not having much luck. Daisy Leach, you've been chatting along and commenting. What have you made of this evening?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Inspiring, and I'm ordering lots and lots of books immediately, including The Beekeeper of Aleppo and Chinua Achebe, because I haven't read that book. So that was like an incredibly energizing introduction, and I'm really it was really good to find out more about Gang of Four, because I've heard about them, but I haven't sort of really kind of heard the sound. I'd love to hear a bit more. Maybe at the end we can play a bit more, but it was really inspiring, Catherine. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Daisy, have you done any Freud? I mean, is that the sort of thing you dip into or no?
No. I don't know very much about Freud. I mean, my husband did have a sort of psychoanalytic reading club, but I was not involved with that. I heard him sort of in the distance.
Is that a thing? A psychoanalytic reading club?
Was a thing.
Oh my goodness, that's extraordinary. Let's hear from Matt. Matt Zancona, he's been chatting along. You loved the Freud choice. You were like, great pick. Oh, don't tell me Matt's disappeared as well. Go on, Tessa. I think you're going to have to pick up the baton here. We're being abandoned by everyone.
God, what a bunch of bloody flakes.
I know, honestly, you can't get the staff.
Maybe it's
really can't.
maybe a drink o'clock type. Anyway, cheers everybody. What a great conversation. I love it. It's been so far, it's so wide ranging, and yeah, exactly. Like Daisy, I've come away with a sort of list of things either that I want to reread or go and read for the first time. But I put that thing in the chat because I'm always really curious. I mean, Catherine's reference to music, and sorry, the dog's going nuts because he wants my supper. I put that thing in the chat about rereading because I come up against this the whole time with friends. I reread books all the time, and they're like, "Why would you reread a book? There are so many new books to read." And
Move down. I'm not controversial. I'm not a rereader, but I also I'm a book. I don't finish them. If I'm not enjoying them, I leave them half done. And to some people, that's completely mind-boggling and atrocious behaviour.
Okay, Liz. So the follow-on question from that is: do you walk out of films or theatre?
Yes. Oh, actually, not theatre. At the interval, I have not gone back. But yeah, that's
anyway. But my comparison to that is: you wouldn't listen to an album once. You wouldn't go, I've listened to that album and never going to listen to it again. So why wouldn't you reread a book? Anyway, that is my incredibly erudite contribution to the evening, Liz. You'll be glad you pulled me in for it.
Also to Moose in the background. Go on, Matt. We were all giving you flack for running away when we started to ask you questions about Freud. But you're claiming a technical error.
I was. No, absolutely. So two things. I mean, first of all, just to reiterate that entertainment's like one of the great privileges I've ever had culturally is to be able to tell Andy Gill how much that album meant to me and means to me. It's just amazing. And I remember the first time I heard it, I just couldn't believe how good it was. And I still think that today. On Freud, I mean, Freud, it's so good to hear someone saying, let's reread Freud, because actually everyone thinks about Freud in terms of their relationship with their parents and sex, and that is an important aspect of Freud. But Freud is also one of the great political analysts of the 20th century. And if you go to Civilization and its Discontents and The Future of an Illusion, things like that, you completely can understand the kind of populist mess we're in now, and figures like Trump and Orban and to a certain extent Boris. It's super relevant, and as was said, you can dip into it. You don't have to kind of swallow 5,000 pages whole. So there you go.
I've absolutely loved it this evening. Thank you so much to all our amazing people who've joined us and who've given their ideas and their energy and their love actually this evening for the things that have inspired them. It's been an absolute pleasure to see Melody and Christy and Catherine and Shola. And please, 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 come to the Primadonna Festival. I mean, who could not after this evening? It sounds like quite the most fabulous thing. And we'll clip the best bits of tonight. We'll put them all over our social media. And I really, really hope to see you there, IRL, dancing backstage and generally having a wonderful time. It's a real pleasure to see you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Have a brilliant rest of the evening. I am going to have a gin. All the best. Bye, everyone.